It's a loss on the plains for the Auburn Tigers against Ole Miss 27-19, but a very close game against top 15 teams. So we'll look at the Tigers with Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation and look ahead to what we could have in store for possibly a spoiler role for this football team going forward. Jamie, of course, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be joining you again, Mark. It's been a while, and I'm glad to be here with you.
It has been a while. And so I'm not learning as much football as I typically do when we get together on a weekly basis. So let's start at the quarterback position, Jamie. Sean White, the numbers don't look great, 12 for 28, but he threw for a lot of yardage on those 12 completions. And you like what you see for the most part.
You know, the biggest thing for Sean White this weekend is you saw leadership qualities out of a young man that is a redshirt freshman quarterback who had taken over the position. And I don't know that he fully had the support of maybe some of the group around him going into, say, the Arkansas game. And maybe even before that, you saw some things in how they handled him that made you wonder why they didn't seem to trust him. Well, in the Arkansas game, he played near perfect from the quarterback position, didn't get some help on several plays that really hurt Auburn in that Arkansas game. You come out here this week, and from my standpoint, I wondered if the coaches had truly grown to trust him. And even though, like you said, his numbers don't bear out very good, if you actually watched the game and saw the condition in which he was asked to play with his left knee, you would understand exactly that the coaches have decided that this is their guy. He is the best option at Auburn, and he played at probably 50%. He was on one leg. And it was one of those things to where you kind of felt for the young man because some of the things that he could not do that we've seen him do over the last few weeks. But I think we saw him and a football team grow up with him at quarterback because of the condition that they asked him to play. A few more drops again this week. However, they played very hard on offense for Sean White. And a few more things you saw on offense. The emergence of Jovon Robinson, who everyone has been waiting on, was something that was a great thing for Auburn people to see.
Yeah, you bring up Jovon Robinson, where during the offseason, a number of times we got together, and the running back situation, you heard the names Peyton Barber, Rock Thomas, and Robinson, and trying to determine who was going to be that lead back, and they've kind of mixed it up. Barber's been the one that's probably gotten the most carries, but it appears as though when Robinson determines that he's going to move some people out of the way, he can do just that.
You know, I think we found out from the Auburn faithful, we weren't sure exactly what Jovon Robinson was going to bring to the team. He got hurt early in the Clemson game. And from the Auburn standpoint, we really never knew how bad that he was injured. So in the subsequent weeks, it appeared that Peyton Barber was just simply taking over the job because he was just better than everyone else. And he did a very good job, I think. He had the most touchdowns in the country over the last 3 games as at 11. But Jovon Robinson, now that we know that he had a severe high ankle sprain and it's kept him out of action pretty much since the Clemson game, he comes into the game and shows the quickness at 235 pounds that other guys just simply don't seem to have. And you saw a big difference when Jovon Robinson entered the game this weekend, and he somewhat took over while he was in 6 yards of carry, didn't break any big runs. So most of those runs were really consistent, hard-nosed runs, and he does fall forward at the end of the play.
And Jamie, talking about a guy who took over the game, Carl Lawson didn't necessarily complete all the plays because he's still rounding up into form, but this guy shows why he was one of the 2 or 3 most sought-after players coming out of high school a couple years ago, and was a main compliment to Dee Ford going down the stretch a couple years ago toward the national championship game because he is a monster.
You know, Auburn people have sorely missed Carl Lawson, and they just didn't know how much until you had to play several games without him. And you saw people were able to scheme to double team the other dangerous defensive linemen, the couple that they do have, and they were able to take everything away, not having to worry about Lawson on the outside. He comes back, maybe not at 100%, but he comes back and causes the scheme to just go away from what they were able to do. Ole Miss immediately had to double him, and it opened up more lanes for other guys such as Adams and the young man from Carrollton, number 95, and his name escapes me at the very moment. But and then you saw Kassanova McKinzy come through unblocked several times because he was getting all the Lawson attention when they moved him to that buck position. So Lawson coming back really opened up a lot of things for Auburn, and he may not be 100%, but he did a great job. He took on Laremy Tunsil, who is widely considered by far the best offensive lineman coming out this next draft, and he really handled Tunsil fairly well on a couple of plays. It was Dontavius Russell who had escaped me, but it's really big for Auburn's defense, not only mentally but schematically, that Carl Lawson is back doing the things that he needs to do to take away the biggest weakness of this defense, which is the pass rush.
Blake Countess is a player that we talked about in the offseason. I saw him play quite a bit of football at Michigan. He had one outstanding season at Michigan, but was nicked up with injuries, and he seems to have taken hold for the Auburn Tigers. He's playing some good football.
He does a really good job for Auburn because they ask him to do an awful lot, and that's something you expect from a young man that's played as much football as he had in a great conference in the Big Ten. But Countess has been asked to play corner. He's been asked to play in the slot. They've asked him to play safety. He's returning kicks. They're basically asking him to do anything and everything they can to help this defense, especially while Lawson was gone. So Countess has been one of those guys. He may be somewhat of an unsung hero at this point simply because Auburn has not been as good as people expected possibly when the year started. But Blake Countess, I think, has accomplished what he looked to do, leaving the University of Michigan to go play in the SEC, play against some guys that a lot of NFL evaluators think are really talented players. And he's doing it at several different positions. I think his big thing was to get evaluated in scenarios that would give him a better opportunity at the next level, and I think he's accomplished that.
This Auburn team at 4-4 has a number of big opponents coming up. Texas A&M next week on the road, of course, the Iron Bowl, and if things fall right, a postseason appearance as well. What would you like to see out of the Tigers the last few weeks of the season?
I would just like to see progress, and I think we have seen progress in a sense at the Arkansas game. You saw some positives, you saw some glaring negatives. This week, even though you come out with a loss, I didn't see as many negatives as I have seen in the past few weeks. The defense gave up 27 points, however. They played quite well. You have to give Ole Miss credit on several of those plays. When you've got Laquon Treadwell matched up with a true freshman DB, and even though the coverage was fairly good, Laquon Treadwell simply made a play on a well-thrown ball, and that's just something that you give to one of the top 10 players in the country. The defense played well. They got a better pass rush. You talked about Carl Lawson. He whiffed on 2 sacks where he had a shot, but it was a different feel and a different look. Auburn had been pushed around for weeks and weeks and weeks. And Ole Miss, who I think is a much better football team than some of the teams that had pushed them around, they couldn't do it. So I was very happy, very impressed. I would like to see the offensive line progress a little more. That group has not done as well as they should have with the talent that they have. Hopefully Shaun White will be healthy. Hopefully we'll see a little more Jovon Robinson. I think Auburn's got a chance to finish out good. But, Mark, you talked about the possibility of a bowl game. Those practices are huge for this team. They need to make a bowl game not for anything other than those additional practices that you get.
You mentioned the Treadwell play down the left sideline. That was key in Ole Miss, avoiding the upset, perfectly thrown ball right in his breadbasket, but he had to track the football right over his head. So we mentioned Treadwell, Laremy Tunsil at left tackle, Robert Nkemdiche. Tony Connor didn't play at this game at safety for Ole Miss. The Rebels at times don't play the part of a top 5 or 10 team, but sometimes they do. If you merely look at the elite players on this roster, if you take like the top 5 players for the Ole Miss Rebels against the top 5 of just about any team in the country, you could make an argument that they have the 5 best players in the country, 1 through 5. They are just loaded in certain spots, and it goes back to that recruiting class from a few years ago. So my question to you, with LSU on the horizon, Mississippi State, Arkansas, your thoughts about Ole Miss making a run at the SEC?
I think Ole Miss is in good position to make that run. It's in their hands. It's up to them. They've got a quarterback who is a playmaker, but he's a bit of a gunslinger, so that can get you into some trouble. I don't know that they are consistent enough in the running game. They do it kind of running back by committee, although Judd looks really good typically when they get him the football. Consistency is going to be the key for them offensively. I think you hit the nail on the head. They're one of the most talented teams at the top of their roster in the entire nation. I don't know what that means for them going forward, simply because the losses of those guys, you cannot recover from losing possibly 4 guys to 5 guys in the first round of the NFL draft when you're at Ole Miss. You hear that from Alabama. You hear that from maybe USC. You hear that from Ohio State. You don't hear it from Ole Miss. So it'll be interesting to see what Hugh Freeze is able to do with that program when those elite guys that he nailed that one year, when they're gone. So I like Ole Miss. I like the story of Hugh Freeze. They've got a young man that I helped in high school. Cody Core is a great young man from Auburn High School. So I really do hope for good things from Ole Miss, especially while Cody is there. But it's going to be interesting to see what they're able to do once this top flight talent leaves, and maybe we'll find out then exactly, how great of a coach Hugh Freeze is. I think he's really good. We'll find out if he's great once this group leaves and see where they are at that point. And you mentioned Nkemdiche and Lawson. It was kind of fun because those two were usually looked at as the number 1 and number 2 players in that class, and they're both very, very good. I would venture to say that Lawson means more to his team simply because Auburn may not have the overall talent that Ole Miss does. Very talented players and very fun to watch.
Jamie, I'm glad you mentioned Cody Core playing at Auburn. That's where he's from. For the first time since he lost his mom to a brain aneurysm. 43 friends at the game and family that really wanted to see him play in his backyard. And Cody Core, the compliment to, as you mentioned, possibly the best wide receiver in the country, but to his own distinction. And a whole lot more about his skill set and his personality and his character. But he should be playing on Sundays as well. Very talented and good kid, apparently.
He's a wonderful kid. He's a wonderful kid from a good family. He was one of those young men that just usually, although he may have been the most talented player on the field nearly every time he stepped on the field in high school, he didn't carry himself that way. He played the game the way you would ask a kid to play, and he did it with class, and he still does it that same way. His story has gotten a bit sad because of that with his mom, but he is a wonderful, wonderful kid.
So the Ole Miss Rebels look to move on to a possible Western Division championship and trip to Atlanta for the Auburn Tigers. It's not going to be the record that their fans expected to start the season, but they've got a redshirt freshman quarterback in place, and the future could certainly be bright considering the recruiting classes that they brought in recent years. Jamie Hancock joining us from Preps Nation to break it down. Jamie, appreciate the time.
Hey, I enjoyed it, Mark. Each and every time I get to come on with you, it's fantastic.